delighted to say I've got the award-winning global F&B legend, Marvin Alballi, on my podcast. He's also an author, which we'll speak a lot to in this podcast. Marvin, thanks so much for coming on. I'm delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to the show.
I'm delighted to have you here. Your just online presence was something I couldn't ignore, sir. I couldn't ignore it. So I had to get you on to spill the beans on your background and spill the beans on all your insights into what takes and what makes a great hospitality business. Like I always like to do at the beginning of every episode is have my guests introduce themselves. So would you mind telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and most importantly, how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. So, my name is Marvin Alballi. I've been in the business for about 26 years now. And I'm an author, Amazon best-selling author. My book, Restaurant Excellence, made it to number one on Amazon for 9 months. And it's one of the highest rated books in the world, especially on Amazon.ae. I'm an industry executive with global experience, having worked in North America, in the Middle East, in Europe, and Asia. Um, One of the unique things about my skill set is that I worked in every category of the industry. Burger King, Applebee's, Chili's, but as well as working with Pierre Gagne and Jason Atherton and Michelin Star and fine dining, which all happened by coincidence, but it was the best coincidence ever in my life because I learned all aspects of the industry. And not many people can say that they worked in all of the sectors,
Yeah.
which gave me, Alex, which helps me to look at challenges and opportunities differently than other professionals. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love like the sort of layered background of all the different experiences within hospitality that you've had. I think it gives you a sort of unique perspective on hospitality in general. You talk about, was it Jason Atherton was the name you mentioned there? You mentioned Chili's, you mentioned Burger King. They're never normally in the same sentence. And you've experienced them throughout. And then also to have a global hospitality kind of background, and in particular where you are today over in the Middle East, which seems to be like a thriving food scene globally with a global sort of image and recognition now. It very much is, you've seen many sort of different things. When I think about it, when you think about, say, your journey through hospitality, you've gone global, you've gone QSR, FSR to fine dining, and we're now in the post-COVID sort of restaurant hospitality sort of world. What has been like in your mind, like the biggest shift, like in sort of consumer guest experience in this sort of time? Like what has really changed?
This is a great question, Alex. About 15 years ago, I'm talking about international markets or even domestically in the United States, franchising a big thing, was the thing in the business. You're talking about um, QSR or casual dining or fast casual in those sectors. But if you look at the past 10 years or 8 years, a lot of chef inspired restaurants starting to pop up and outperform casual dining chains. And these chefs restaurants, Alex, have fresher food, more innovation, more creativity, Instagrammable dishes, and locally sourced ingredients, which, if you think of global chains, they struggle with that because their consistency is built on domestic, large distribution. And Cisco and other companies are the ones who deliver their food. That's what I see has happened on the luxury side. Because I also work in the hotel industry and I led about 775 restaurants in 30 countries. There's a shift towards luxury and more refined dining. Not fine dining per se. It could be
Yeah.
a premium casual looking restaurant, but there's a lot of creativity and desire to have luxury destinations. That's what I see happening in the market.
It's interesting you say that. I had the founder, CEO of Van Leeuwen Ice Cream on the podcast, and I'm sure you come across Van Leeuwen. The actual podcast has not been released yet for those who may listen to this, but when it is released. But one of the things, to that exact point, the kind of luxuryization of the sort. It's like that's you. I'll call that a neologism. The luxuryization of the experience. That it's not necessarily luxury, but it's like the elements that go into what we would expect to be luxury. Like you're talking about, like the creativity, the kind of attention to detail, like within the food and the restaurant, the hotel experience. Like he was saying the same thing about his product. Like he was there at a time when creating like a premium type of, in this case, ice cream didn't really exist. And they're obviously like, they were like the categorization of, say, ice cream as a product that can be premium can actually scale, where they're at 60 something locations now. They're in like every store. And it's very fascinating to me to hear that when it comes to like luxury in terms of restaurants and hospitality in particular, because there is obviously like a perception of what luxury looks like. But basically, with like a kind of a grander strategy for your restaurant business, you can take elements of that luxury and make that happen in a way that doesn't have that sort of perceived luxury price. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, you're right. And look, it's interesting you mentioned the ice cream company because I opened 7 marble slab creameries. And marble
Yeah.
slab creamery is priced at a higher price point than an average ice cream from Baskin Robbins or other companies. And we had difficulties in the beginning convincing consumers paying a price point, just like what happened with Starbucks when they started and how the price point went up and consumers accepted it. I
Yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to call it luxury. I want to call it premium product. I want to call it
Yeah.
like the if you think about the burger category, a better burger. If you think of Five Guys and Shake Shack, what they've done, they came to the market. It's not a QSR burger. You pay 15, 16, $20 in some countries, even $25
Yeah.
for that burger. But they're giving you Angus beef, amazing quality of burger bun, high quality fries. They're giving you a premium product, right? The amazing lettuce and tomato. And consumers are willing to pay when the
Yeah.
quality is right. Now, at the same time, though, at the same time, with the recession and with the inflation, fast food operators are doing well because people, there is a sector of the population which will trade down, and this happens throughout all the recessions. They will buy supermarkets that sell you ready to eat salads and food.
Yeah.
These really do well, like Whole Foods and others. And same thing with QSR, pizza concepts, fast food concepts, because also in some countries the inflation post the Ukraine Russia war reached as much as 30 and 35%.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So it's interesting two trends. Definitely there is a trend where people want premium product and they're willing to pay for it. But at the same time, there is a trend where people are going to fast food, lower priced items to be able to afford that kind of meal.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's definitely a sort of what's that, like a fragmentation in the market in terms of consumer demand, but also in terms of the options for food that just hasn't really existed before. There's a company that we work with that has hit like Dave's Hot Chicken, for example. They're like 3, 4 years old. They just
Yeah.
hit 200 locations, as in you can find a category and just nail it properly, and there's a market for that kind of product, and it's amazing. And so I think there's also just an extreme amount of demand, like extreme amount of supply of so many different options, and
Sure.
there's like a way to meet that kind of demand. Now, whether that keeps going in whatever type of market, global economy we find ourselves in is another thing. But it is amazing in the sense that you talk about like kind of your experience over the last 15 years. Like clearly one of the big changes, like to your point, it's just been like what you were saying, like franchise was the be all and end all. And now there's just like far more choice. Like you've got like your sort of premium chef, like famous your
Yeah,
I,
and
I know that I know that you like to say that you were ahead of Gordon Ramsay's cookbook as well, but like you got your
no, Alex, in the 90s, when I worked for Chili's and Applebee's, they were doing extremely well. Casual dining
yeah,
was flying. Casual dining sector nowadays in the US is struggling for many years. And when I say chef inspired restaurants, I don't mean expensive. Some of those restaurants, the price point is as good as is matches what Chili's and Applebee's charges and Cheesecake Factory,
yeah,
but they're doing a fresher product, more innovative product, and people go to those restaurants to support local chefs and support local farmers. So that's what I see the shift. That's the biggest shift that I see globally actually, having lived in the Middle East and North America, 50 best organization that rates restaurants, the Michelin Guide
Yeah.
growing globally, Michelin Guide growing very fast in North America, in Europe, in Canada. So you can see the shift. You can clearly see the shift in
Which is
consumers' behavior
which
and
is
preferences.
yeah, which is amazing that there's like a global shift
Yes.
towards this as opposed to kind of secular American kind of trend that is going elsewhere. It's amazing that it exists like that. When it comes to restaurants that or hospitality business that are seeking to take advantage of this, and this is their guest brand and their sort of guest experience, because I know you say that it starts with the food first, then it's like really the brand. Like, what would you say are like what are ways that like restaurants can get on top of this sort of trend or get ahead of this trend and create a long lasting business out of this trend? If you were, say, like you mentioned, say Chili's, for example, and casual dining struggling, if you were like, say, they were to call you tomorrow, Marvin, and say, yo, Marvin, we need you in here. We need to solve this, like, this where our sales are stagnant or our sales are whatever. And I don't know, but if there was something like that, how would you help them get ahead of this sort of new kind of
Yeah,
modern trend?
for sure. First of all, the problem with casual dining restaurants, they have very similar products. Nachos in nearly in all of the casual dining restaurants in North America. Fried wings, chicken wings in all of them, fried cheese in all of them. I Innovation can play a big role in new products. That I see that sometimes for me a lack of innovation in that area, because I can take you, we can go in New York to several franchises, and I can bet money that we're going to find the same exact menu items in about 5 to 6 large franchise companies. I'm like, but why? But it's all
Yeah.
about differentiation, right? So this is one part. I would try my best to work on freshness of products. It's not about large menus. It's about fewer menu items, but you do extremely well.
Yeah.
Uh, and be a little bit non-traditional in the marketing approach, because also most of them follow the same exact marketing approach. Um, Service is always based on who you hire and how you train, and it's a challenge in North America because of turnover. But can you create a culture, just like Chick-fil-A did with their training and the way they approach service? Can you create a culture where you outperform the competition? And with large chains, the challenge is always about the cost of running the business, labor
Yeah.
cost, food cost. Can you be so innovative and so creative and say, I'm going to accept a higher food cost and a little bit lower profitability for the long-term gain of repeat business and loyalty? Can you be that CEO who will do the non-traditional approach to fix this?
That's a very interesting point, okay? Because loyalty is such a hot topic across hospitality. I open up every, industry online magazine and it's like loyalty this, loyalty that, it's loyalty innovation or data points for loyalty, all this kind of stuff. Everybody's talking about loyalty. But to your point, it's like, how are you willing to give up some of the bottom line today to see some further upside tomorrow
And
and
sorry, Alex.
investing that?
Yeah, yeah, a CEO who's listening to this podcast might think that I'm unreasonable because there was a lot of pressure on the raw material cost. The inflation is so fast and so high that it's killing profitability. I get that, but there are ways around it in terms of smaller menus, better product, more innovation, premium product. There are ways around it.
This is exactly it. I think it is being clever with your menu. It's being clever with the items you're selling. It's like, how do you insulate yourself from sort of commodity sort of spikes? I've had a number of people on this podcast talk to me about like avocado spikes. Avocado and chicken spikes are two things.
Yeah,
Wings during
yeah,
COVID
yeah,
was something that,
yeah.
like, if you were a wing business, not very, not, not a very, not a very good happy time. Which is interesting because I think like the like it all actually comes down to understanding the fundamentals of your business with an ability to like zero in on P&L in particular, and being able to zero in on particular items within the P&L. So it's like having a great grasp of your business fundamentals is what can be an unlock for you in your business. I like you say hiring and you say like labor costs and you say food costs, but in reality, it's a double click into what is it within your hiring. Okay, in the United States, is it a problem with retention of staff and churn, or is it like the actual acquisition cost of the staff, or
Yeah.
is it like inflation? Oh, like we go into say food inflation. What in particular within food inflation, but within the food cost is costing us a lot, and it's like being creative with like further utilization of that food or removing that item from that food and some new menu design. I feel like there's a lot of double clicks, but it is P&L focus. Is I feel like it's
Yeah,
kind of
but I want to go back to this point as well. In my experience, Alex, I've seen CEOs who forced franchisees and corporate stores to buy digital menu boards. Okay, I get it. Digital menu boards, you can change pricing faster, you can control the menu faster, or having at the table games, an iPad where you play games and you pay the bill, speeds up the payment process. But those CEOs were rolling out these multi-million dollar initiatives when the experience at the restaurant wasn't great, when the food wasn't hot, when the
yeah,
food was late, when the food was lower quality. So for me, and again, I ask your questions, what you would tell those CEOs and companies, I would say experience first. Put all your efforts in experience. And then it doesn't matter for a customer if you come in and there's a chalkboard where the menu is written or there's a digital menu board. For me, it doesn't matter. For me,
yeah,
all I want to get is a great meal at a reasonable price and a great service. And that's it. But that's what I see sometimes huge investments in softwares and IT and
yeah.
different initiatives and a new design. But the fundamental problem of guest experience is not solved. It just doesn't make any sense.
You're quoted everywhere online for what I'm about to say next, and I too am going to quote this because I think it's actually a very I think it's a great quote. I think, and I'm going to botch it, but you can correct me. But this one is, he said, how to achieve great results in restaurants. And you say an average experience is average sales, and a good experience is good sales. But you really emphasize a wow experience equals wow sales, and a wow experience is what you want to achieve. And to your point, like iPads to play around are not going to solve a bad experience when somebody gets a delayed meal or the burger's cold or the this whatever soggy or whatever it is that comes out and the experience is just a big lame. So talk to me when you say like the wow experience
Yeah.
and yeah,
Thank you. To simplify really the formula for success in the restaurant business, to put it in very simple words, from a front of the house standpoint, definitely an average experience will deliver average sales. And if your restaurant delivering everyday average experiences, you're going to have average sales. If these experiences are good, you're going to have good sales. But if every food server you have on the team, then before they go to their tables, they say to themselves, I am going to go to this table and I'm going to wow those guests. I'm going to exceed their expectations. If every one of them goes with the same goal to their tables, trust me, you don't have to worry about digital menu board or an iPad. You're going to be super successful. And that's where I see the companies that's the successful companies that I worked for, most of them, even in F&B or outside the food service industry, had amazing training departments and amazing culture that made them outperform the competition. That's really the key.
which is I feel the major tread line in the entire industry, which I think separates good from great, is culture. And I guess my follow up question to you there is what is the role of culture and what makes great culture in hospitality that can separate the good from the great here to create that wow experience?
Sure. I had the pleasure of working for a Canadian company called White Spot. So
Yep.
White Spot is about 96 years old company. And the VP of HR there, Denise Buchanan, used to tell us, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Love
And,
that.
and I totally agree because without the right culture where people are happy, motivated, and well trained, At the same time, I don't want to be I don't want to sound as if I am just talking about inspirational stuff here. I said happy, motivated, trained, and a culture of high standards. So it means you are tough on standards, not on people. If you have that culture, you're definitely going to succeed. But without that, you're going nowhere. So
Well, that's
culture and
yeah.
sorry, Alex, culture is based on great training department, great hiring, having the right talent on the team. Um, when an employee joins a new company, they're always excited for the first few months, but later on it fades away as routine kicks in. How do you keep this employee motivated? How do you keep it exciting for your people? So and how do you keep the learning and development? How do I join your company as a food server, and then I become a food server trainer, and then I become a supervisor, then a manager, then a multi-unit manager? What is that career path in the industry?
Yeah.
And we
But like,
don't in the restaurant industry we don't do that well.
and which are very interesting. Okay, you mentioned training, hiring, talent, learning about. These are all human things, and we look at these as costs on a P&L. Like we look at the what makes the culture, which is what we believe separates good from great, and yet we look at it as a cost and not a sort of like asset. Like we look at it as a
Yeah,
liability on the P&L as opposed to an asset. And I'm curious, when you're talking to restaurant CEOs, when you're talking to hospitality CEOs, hotel CEOs, and you're trying to explain to them like the value of culture, because these people aren't like idiots as well, super smart, super successful people, and their job is maximizing profit for their stakeholders, shareholders, whatever it is. That's their number one priority. But like, how do you like explain the value? Like, I always ask people in your position here on the pod is the material impact of culture. It's okay if I needed to just like I look at myself and say marketing, for example, and I'm like, okay, you spend money on ads. How many new customers do you get? And it's okay. I spent 10,000 and I got 10 customers. $1,000 a customer. What's the ROI on those? Okay, it's a 6x. So for every one, I get $6 back. It's okay, cool. Like I can speak to that. But when it comes to culture and investment in culture, you talk about training, you talk about the hiring, you talk about like identifying the talent, like for a roadmap to say, how do we get them to area director, regional directors, all the way up, learning about these are all like really big costs. And so if I was like on the other end of that, like if I was the CEO, how do I understand the ROI of sort of these programs? Like, how would you speak to that?
yeah, sure. And look, let's be honest here and practical. And I'm not trying to be on this podcast just being inspirational. I'm a very practical businessman.
You are
Look,
practical.
they are CEOs are pressured by stakeholders and shareholders more than anything else. When profitability dips, shareholders will start making some noise. I get that. Now, as a CEO of a large restaurant company, your goal is the longevity of the business is your number one priority, not the 12 months performance on the P&L. And unfortunately, that's what happens most of the time. We're driven by quarters, how this quarter one did versus Q1 versus Q2. But that's more of a short-term thinking. And that
Yes.
kills some certain organizations, completely destroys them because they start cutting costs, either food costs or labor costs or training. You got to do both at the same time, Alex. You have to have great food, great culture, great training, ongoing marketing. You can't marketing as the CEO of the Great Harvest, the Great Harvest Bread Company, Mike Ferrari, a great friend of mine, said you can't have start stop in marketing. It doesn't work. Uh,
Love to hear that.
yeah, so it's a combination of efforts. But again, let's go back to the fundamentals and what I wrote in the book: great food, great service, great atmosphere, great training. These four, they create for you the strongest form of marketing and the cheapest, which is word of mouth. When
Yes.
people go out and talk about your restaurant in a positive way, when people take photos of the food and tag your restaurant, you don't I don't want to exaggerate, but you don't need marketing at that point because you create advocates. You create loyal people who talk. And personal recommendation, according to KPMG, a research that they've done 10 years ago, is the strongest form of marketing, or it's the strongest driver of choosing a restaurant. So Alex, if you're my friend and you are my friend, and if we're close friends, and you say, Marvin, the other day I went and I bought a car, I bought a Range Rover, and I love this car, it's this and the other. The chances of me buying a Range Rover if I needed a car will be very high because it's based on a recommendation of a friend. It's stronger than TV and radio and Instagram and Facebook and all the money you spend on marketing. So if a smart CEO will be thinking strategically, how do I make customers come to my restaurant, leave my restaurant, and speak proudly about their experience? If you get there, you'll be unstoppable. Period.
I love hearing that. First of all, as the marketer in chief at Landed, this is fine. You're speaking my language, sir. But
Yeah.
also, it's very obvious. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I find so interesting about the whole industry in general is that designing a program for word of mouth, good food, good atmosphere, good service, like these things are not rocket science. And that's what I find so fascinating as to like why the businesses actually fail.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
this is what I
Alex,
find.
that's a great point. That's a great point. Yes, it sounds simple, but it's not, because if the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
So then you say, okay, if we look at a kitchen operation, you and I and every human on the on this earth will agree that good food will bring people back. It's a no-brainer. Yes, but the how to, it's all in the how to. Companies that succeed know the how to well. So they know, they have in the kitchen, they have line checks, they have a flawless procedure of consistency, they adhere to standards, they have a culture of excellence, they have well trained employees, they source great ingredients, not necessarily the most expensive, but good quality ingredients. Their innovation, I use the word innovation a lot today on the podcast, their R&D department is super strong. If you look at Pizza Hut, Pizza Inn, Papa John's, and all of them, the only differentiator between all those pizza restaurants is R&D. It's R&D that delivers that better quality pizza.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I like it's okay. Pizza's a great example because I guess you're in a commodity business. You pick up the phone, there's 50 businesses in a 15-mile radius to you that sell a pizza. So why are you getting picked? Why are you getting picked over that one? You know what I mean? And it's probably a great experience the first time, great experience the last time that you had it. And it probably has a type of pizza that you're probably like a fan of. I guess there's some people here that don't like Hawaiian. I personally do, and some places do better Hawaiians than others. But because the devil is in the details is like the thing. What's interesting, and then go back to the marketing thing. I had an amazing guy on the podcast last week, a guy called Sean Walchef, and you might see him online. He does basically like smartphone storytelling for restaurants is his thing, and he's like, "Be the show, not the commercial," is his like phrase, which
True.
is a great little thing. And he's like, people like brands, like restaurant brands, like will work with him to design their sort of online presence. He's like, your food, it's great. Like, how do you get that message across? If everyone is basically online, it's like, how do you design a program for actually like capturing the essence of your restaurant business online? And it was very fascinating because again, it goes back to I look at what you say about word of mouth, and I'm like, okay, I like my digital sort of would be like the infatuation, Reddit, like what are people doing on TikTok about restaurants? Are people commenting about the food? Is it positive? I'm like, that for me is like also word of mouth. So the question is like, how does the business like get itself online? You know what I mean? How does it have the permission to do it? And
Yeah,
I
and
actually
and
feel that's a culture thing. Because if your
true.
CEO doesn't like want to like basically make the restaurant be online like a sort of native brand, it's hard for some random staffer inside the back of house to do that kind of fun prep videos
Yeah.
that like show the culture of the restaurant, show the process of the food that made me go, oh, you know what? I want to go and try out that restaurant. You know,
That's a challenge for franchise restaurants, because if you
absolutely.
sell wings in every single branch, who's going to come in and take a picture of wings and be proud of it and post to his friends, oh, look, I'm having chicken wings? Very few people will do that. So how do you create Instagram stories, TikTok stories that are innovative, that are different? How do you partner not with influencers? How do you partner with certain how do you do certain activities that are non-traditional? I think the key word here is non-traditional marketing, because
Yeah.
don't expect by posting a photo of your food that people are going to flock to your restaurant,
Yeah.
because there are a million other restaurants that are doing the same. And a lot of
Totally.
restaurants make that mistake. They post, oh, we post 3 times a week. But it's not about posting. It's
Uh,
how engaging. It's not about how many followers you have. It's about how many engaged followers you have.
totally.
Yeah.
And you made a good point earlier as well. You were saying that somebody, you were mentioning somebody who said it, was it a chef who said, or a restaurant owner was like, you're always on.
Yeah.
As in, like, your marketing needs to be like all the time. Like, it has to be always on.
Yeah.
And your marketing
Mike
is not
Ferrati.
just
Yeah.
Mike Ferrati, yeah. And it's not just posting on Instagram. It's like everything that touches your guest experience
Yeah.
is your
Yeah.
marketing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And making tweaks, making changes, speaking to your clients, customers, whatever you want to call them, like that is anything that's client facing, customer facing is your marketing. And being always on about that and living that
Yeah.
brand. I think that's definitely something I hear on
Yeah.
this pod is that there's definitely a disconnect in lots of restaurants between what is like a sort of modern preference for information about your restaurant versus what's actually delivered back to them. And those
Sure.
that are able to do that seem to be like able to create these extraordinary new brands, either super traditional sort of brands that are like 100 years old to brands that are 5 years old. And how do you like, and they're like accelerating into a new place where others are not. That's definitely something I
Yeah.
feel and I hear on this podcast.
Sure. And again, as we said on the beginning of this podcast, independent restaurants have the ability to play around, change menu items, introduce menu items as frequent as on a weekly
Yeah.
basis if they want to. How do you do this with a franchise chain of 1,200 restaurants?
Yes.
You're very limited. You're extremely limited. So you're losing that war of social media because independent restaurants are outperforming you in creativity.
Okay, so a good question for you then is: Are for the franchise owner that owns 100, owns 1,000 locations, what can they do here? Like, how would you unlock that type of creativity for them?
Yeah, I tell you, and as I said earlier, a minute ago, you probably can't do much with the menu because the menu is coming from the corporate office. It's about consistency, and that's how a franchise operate. You have to start thinking what activities I can do. There's a term called stunt marketing or shock advertising. I know a restaurant in Dubai that had their restaurant manager and the chef on speedboats, and they filmed them coming from the sea to the restaurant. Another one called Above 11 here, they brought a llama all the way into the restaurant. Another one, McGettigan's, it's an Irish bar here in Dubai, and they said on Valentine's, bring a picture of your ex and get a free drink. And people, it went viral because people brought picture of their exes, they tear it off and get a free drink. It's cheeky, but if you can't do much with the product, what can you do around the product,
Yeah,
around the experience that will draw attention to your restaurant? That's what it is.
yeah,
It's grabbing attention, and shorts is a perfect proof that people's attention has gone to 5 seconds and 10 seconds, even shorter. I don't
oh
know. Hey,
man.
listen, Al, I don't know how many people are going to stick on this podcast to hear it till the end. So, but
I always joke. I drop in like little elephants into the end of this, little white elephants. And go, yeah, if anybody's listening this far, but I think you did. I saw something online. You said, which I think is quite interesting on this very topic, which you were saying, like, build a brand, not just a restaurant, and like. I guess this is what we're talking about, but it's the brand is not just like the marketing. And I think people assume one is the same and they're not. Like, we're talking about guest experience, we're talking about great food, we're talking about great service. There's more to it. And I think of the brands that you're working with today that you go, I guess, publicly speak to, what are ones that have built like an amazing brand that are not just a restaurant or not just
yeah,
a hotel?
yeah. I consulted for a restaurant called Orfali Brothers in Dubai, which appeared recently, about a month ago, on Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix. I don't know if you know that
Great show.
show. Yeah,
Great show.
and they won 50 best restaurant in Middle East and North Africa 2 years in a row, and they won several awards. And I also work with other chefs like Reef Uthman and his group. They run brands. They're not running restaurants. They have a strategy. They're
Yeah.
building customer loyalty. Their attention to details is just incredible. It's just incredible, the attention to details, the training programs, because they're not thinking short term. They're not thinking Q1, Q2 as a franchise would think. They're not thinking about shareholders and stakeholders. They're thinking
Yeah.
about the most important shareholder and stakeholder, which is the customer or
Which
the
is
guest.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would, I prefer to use the word guest actually, not customer.
Yeah. Yeah, which and I think what's amazing is like not losing sight of that, because again, like we said, the devil's in the details, but the fundamentals are pretty like obvious. Do you know what I mean? A great guest experience, yeah, okay. There's devil in those details. Great food, there's devil in those details. Marketing, attention to detail, but like on a fundamental level, for me, when I hear what makes this, all of it stems from the people, no matter what. Like you need to like have as world class trained, as world class staff, like as elevated to a level as they possibly can go. And I know, like you might say, okay, you might correct me here and go, no, I think if you wanted to work in a QSR, they don't need to be world class. But I do think what might separate is like unlocking people's human potential to do the best job they can with the best training, with the best leadership, and be
Yeah,
like and a way to identify that kind of talent within your organization. Now, I can't speak to say MENA in terms of its hiring like issue. Obviously, you alluded to the United States having an issue with retention, and it's very true. And it's a super hot hospitality market, and people are coming and going constantly. And I guess that's why Landed is in business today, because there's an extreme like hiring sort of challenge. I don't like using the word crisis because I think it's a bit much, but it's
yeah.
certainly a challenge for businesses.
But it is borderline crisis. It is borderline crisis. If you talk to restaurant operators and you talk to many of them, they'll
Oh,
tell you that retention is a borderline crisis for them.
Oh, for me, what I hear constantly is top of funnel, impossible to find quality. Okay, we now find quality, but it's so expensive to find quality. To then retention, we need to keep the staff we have. But then the question is, oh, okay, now we got to train them, and that's expensive. And so that's what I mean by I find
Yeah,
that what the kind of conversation I've been hearing for 2 years now is that, and it's interesting because you mentioned training, hiring, talent, L&D, all these human things that make a great restaurant, but we think of them in terms of cost and not in terms of asset. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Which I think is
yeah,
a thing kind of almost like a mindset when thinking
yeah.
about
And
what's up.
if there's a CEO listening to this podcast, I don't want them to think that you and I are just saying, oh, training and having the right people. Because if you ask everyone, they'll tell you to give you the same answer. What I'm trying to say here, from my experience with more than 18 American franchises in hundreds of independent restaurants, it boils down to what type of training, how effective is the training, how is it written, what's the quality of the material, what's the approach, what's the delivery, who's executing the training. Yes, we all agree great food is important. We all agree great service is important. We all agree great training is important. But again, the devil is in the details. Because I
Yeah,
worked with brands that are similar, that are identical to each other, so similar to each other. One of them outperformed the other by $1 million more average units volume. What was it? It wasn't the product. It was the way they went about their business and the culture they built and the training they did and the innovation they had.
yeah, and I guess all that kind of comes up to summarizes into say like very high standards. It's like standards of excellence, standards of application, standards of effort, like trying to do more with what you have and having a clear vision for what it is, which then comes back to just having great leadership in your GMs and having great leadership in your executive team to parlay that vision to the GM to make that kind of happen. And so I guess one of the last topics I'm always curious is just when you speak a lot about it in your book as well, which is your chapter on leadership and training. But I guess like for the audience here, what do you define leadership as in hospitality, and what can
Yeah,
people do to try and figure out how to utilize some of these nuggets that you're about to drop?
sure. A lot of people mix up leadership with management. They're two
Yeah,
different things. Holding a pre-shift briefing or having a meeting with the staff or with the staff members or placing a food order or doing writing the schedule is management. Leadership is totally different thing. Leadership is how do you inspire people, motivate people when you have a vision and a mission. Yeah. So when you join a company, you're joining a mission, a promise. So how do you make team members believe in that vision? That's really leadership. And you know how your approach in terms of being honest and professional, your approach as a leader on a restaurant level, what's the culture you're creating? Even standards, even allowing a simple example. If you are a restaurant manager and you walk by the pickup window and fries on the floor, some restaurant managers will ignore it. By
Yeah.
ignoring it, you're creating a standard that it's acceptable to have French fries on the floor. So what I'm trying to say here, what kind of culture are you creating with your standards? What do you allow and don't allow, right? And a lot of owners, you asked me about culture a lot today on the podcast, and a lot of CEOs and restaurant owners leave hiring to the restaurant manager or even to an assistant manager. Hiring has to become the number one task of restaurant owners. I know very successful restaurant owners who will not allow anyone to join their company unless their profile and their persona and principles and ethics match their ethics.
Which I think in a very hot hospitality market for talent is a real kind of stake in the ground to be so adamant about that, because I think like you're under pressure to fill the restaurant with competent people to serve your guests and to slow down that process by obviously limiting, because you've got to say like a population of people that want to work there, and you're able to say okay, but 80% of these are not going to fit our profile, so the remaining 20% are within our pipeline for candidates to come in and work here. What you're sacrificing in the short term, you're going to win in the long term. But again, it goes back to that point we were talking about earlier about like profitability. It's understanding that nuance of if you're able to forego some of that profit today for the long term repeatability, habituality, repeat business that you're looking for, that loyalty, it goes the same for your hiring. Because if you put anybody in there and they don't meet your standards, your codes of ethics, the morals that you want from your type, because Chick-fil-A is not going to hire anybody. Like they have a very particular set of requirements that they're looking for from their staff, and they are very hands-on in how they train that kind of staff for the welcoming and everything. I think it's like putting a stake in the ground to say what you're saying, which is if you are to live and breathe your culture, you need to be very deliberate and intentional with how you
Yeah.
design the hiring process itself.
And look, and in the current circumstances where there's shortage of labor and you're forced to hire average employees, not superstars,
Yeah.
fine. The solution to that, invest more in the restaurant manager, the leader, is somehow the owner of the restaurant. If you have the right leader, everything cascades from there. Even if you're forced to hire average people, you can always train and improve and develop and make them better people. So I understand today people will say, but listen, there's a shortage of labor, Marvin, in the United States. I need to hire anyone. I get it, no problem. As long as you have the right leader in the restaurant who creates a certain culture, even even you know what they say, an average person who hangs around with superstars becomes closer and closer to becoming a superstar.
Yeah. It rubs off for sure.
That's it.
How
That's
could
what
you
I'm
not
trying to
be
say.
inspired? Yeah, no, you're dead right. You're absolutely right, which goes back to identifying great GMs and unlocking great GMs for your restaurant or
Yeah.
for your hotel, which is awesome. And it's a great point to finish our podcast on, I have to say. Marvin, you've been an absolute legend. This conversation's gone on almost 50 minutes without skipping a beat. We have covered a lot here. And man, honestly, I'm just delighted that you came on you came on the show. I don't want to say my show because it's a bit arrogant of me. But what I will say is I'm delighted that you came on. I think you've been like phenomenal here to me today. Give me this amount of time. I do want to give your book a shout out to everybody. His book is called Restaurant Excellence: The Ultimate Guide to Success in the Food and Beverage Industry. Available on every kind of Amazon is what I learned last week. I didn't even know that Amazon existed yet last week. I've never been to the Middle East myself, but it's there and it's on .com, it's on .co.uk. And so,
And Alex, thank you so much. And if they want to know, if they want to read reviews about the book on Amazon, your listeners can go to amazon.ae because there are 61 reviews there. And the best deal and the best price is on the website. If they go to our Instagram page, Restaurant Excellence Book, they will see a lot of videos, probably a portion of this podcast in the future and a lot of training tips, and they can get the best deal. I really enjoyed it. Your questions are amazing. Alex, in this conversation, we didn't talk much about execution of the kitchen or certain steps in service or certain design matters, but we talked about bigger stuff and more strategic stuff, which is the culture, the training, the inflation, the turnover. And these are huge pain points for the industry today. So maybe we need to have another podcast where we talk about that, where we
Part
dig
two.
deep into the nitty gritty of the
Well,
business.
we absolutely can, man. I micro, I can go macro, I can go whatever way because I always say I like to give my guests the platform to speak to the things that they're passionate about, and I like to be able to follow that conversation and probe where I want to probe. And so it's funny how this conversation materialized that way, but we absolutely can go to a part two, and I am super down for that. Create another hour of content, which is perfect because we're creating artifacts for the internet, and hopefully one person somewhere hears this, sees this, and is inspired by what we were just talking about there. And I
Good.
have no doubt that anybody listening to you, Marvin, will be absolutely inspired. I feel so much more competent having spent an hour listening to you. So I appreciate that, man, and I appreciate you coming on. You were an absolute legend, and thanks so much.
Thanks so much.